Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Cooper, the Senior Systems Engineer for SSA Solutions with the ComSpot Corporation, and I'm here today with Dan Oltrogge, our Director for the Center for Space Standards and Innovation, and also the Program Manager for the Space Data Association's Space Data Center, along with T.S. Kelso, the Operations Manager for that Space Data Center. And we're here today to talk to you about SDC because it is actually celebrating its 10-year anniversary on July 15, 2020. So we want to come to you guys today and talk to you a little bit about the genesis, the history of spaceflight safety, how it grew up to become the efforts that are taking place today at the SDC, and what some of the achievements are, and maybe a look ahead at where we're going. So welcome here, Dan, TS, nice to see you guys again.
Thank you.
And so with that, let's talk a little bit about the history of spaceflight safety itself. TS, maybe you can tell us some details about how spaceflight safety got started from your perspective.
Well, I originally started this effort back in probably 2002 when I was heading up analysis at Air Force Space Command. And we were dealing with major military operations in theaters in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we were sending 80 to 90% of our commercial or our communications over commercial satellites in and out of the theater. And so my concern at the time was, what were we doing to screen those commercial satellites all in GEO to prevent some kind of an unintended collision that might impact what we were doing in those operations? And so the question at the time was, are we doing anything to screen them? And the answer was essentially, no, we only screen US DoD satellites. And so I was trying to make an effort to get the requirements changed to address that. And the typical pushback that we got was, well, that's too hard to do. It would take a supercomputer. It would cost millions of dollars. We couldn't even generate the results in a timely fashion. So nothing was getting done. And so when I retired from the Air Force and AGI asked me to come work for them and told me to do something good for the community, I figured this might be that good thing. And so we started working on an effort on Celestrak called Socrates, Satellite Orbital Conjunction Reports, assessing threatening encounters in space. And the whole effort there was to show that we could do screening for all payloads. We didn't know at the time which ones necessarily were operational, but we could screen all of those against the full catalog using standard commercial off-the-shelf software. We used SDK and standard orbital data products. We used TLEs, and do that on commercial off-the-shelf hardware, standard desktop PC, and produce the results in a timely fashion. And the whole goal was to get that out there, to get people to understand that it wasn't as hard as it seemed to be to make the results available via the internet, so that people could start to understand what the magnitude of the problem was. And of course, the situation was much simpler back then.
Okay, great. Thanks for those details. Can I call it Socrates, or does it have to be Socrates as a Bill and Ted fan?
Yeah, it's Socrates.
Okay. Hey, so
gosh, I know you always call it Socrates.
So given all of that, and obviously running with that, a little while after the Air Force started to stand up the pilot program for sharing of space surveillance data, and then that kind of turned into CFE, which turned to SSA sharing. We know that those services exist today, and we appreciate everything that you did, TS, in standing up that. But still, obviously, there were some gaps, some shortfalls, if you will, in the sufficient needs and capabilities to support spaceflight safety. Maybe, Dan, you can talk to a little bit about the gaps in spaceflight safety that sort of spurred industry into action to self-form the nonprofit organization SDA for that purpose.
Yeah, in fact, as good as the systems and SSA that have been provided by the government is, even back in the 2000 timeframe, there's a recognition, even highlighted by some of the work that TS has done through Celestrak and Socrates, pronouncing it that way, that really showed that the existing systems, again, as good as they are, were not meeting the full need. There were gaps in the accuracy, precision, comprehensiveness, timeliness, transparency of the existing products. And so that spurred the industry into action to self-form and try and not replace but augment the services that the government was providing for spaceflight safety. And it's built also on the recognition that we weren't bringing together all of the data that's out there. That was one of the gaps. We weren't pulling together all the aggregate good data that the operators have, that some of the commercial community have in SSA sensors, and then some of the government. We weren't aggregating that in a comprehensive way to get a complete picture, consistent picture.
So it was really industry then that sort of began the stand-up, if you will, of sort of a more fully fleshed out spaceflight safety regime to the extent that they could do it then.
Yeah, and I view spaceflight safety as needing to be a holistic view. We need to look at all the parts where we can make it better. We need to not leave any stone unturned to try and make space as safe as we can. I think that some in the commercial community have tried to make a good SSA system, or maybe in the government they have. And it is a challenging problem. If you look at all the little links and components of a spaceflight safety system, every one of them has to be correct and accurate in order for us to get a complete picture. And even one broken link in that chain can totally invalidate your result. So what we've seen is that because it's such a challenging problem, this has led at times to other gaps where people have made some, let's say, overly simplifying assumptions just to get to the answer. But in the process, they have data that's really not quite as actionable and accurate as it needs to be.
Okay, thanks. So SDA stands up and they begin to have the operations done through the Space Data Center. TS, can you tell us a little bit about the Space Data Center as the ops manager? What goes on there today? What kind of things are they doing? How are they carrying out their mission?
Well, the main thing that we do in the SDC is we take ephemeris from all of our operators. And so right now we have about 30 operators. They come from countries all around the world. And we get ephemeris for almost 700 satellites in LEO and GEO, even in some of the intermediate orbits like O3b and their 8,000 kilometer high orbits around the equator. And so we get all that data in, we go through a rigorous quality check for all that data. We constantly do comparative types of analysis to make sure that the data is good, that if there are issues with any of the operator data or any of the data that we get from the US government, that we can quantify what those issues are and report those back to the source, because we realize any system is going to have weaknesses or failures or oversights that have to be dealt with, and we don't want to just be cranking data through without any understanding of whether there are issues. And so we do that, and then we screen all of the operator satellites against the full catalog every 2 hours. And so we generate reports, we send those reports to the operators. We also do a variety of other tasks, like we take the conjunction data messages that are sent out by 18th, where they screen using their SP ephemeris against usually their SP ephemeris. We assess that or reassess that with the operator data and give all of our operators, a timely view of what the differences might be when they use these different types of data, so they can better understand each event that's coming up. And so we portray that in a way that makes it easy to digest. If you think about some of the operators we have, one, for example, is Planet. They have over 150 satellites, and as you might imagine, they get quite a few conjunctions every day. And so you have to find a way to distill that information down to the point in a single report where they can focus on which issues are important and which ones they may not need to worry about. So it's that kind of an ongoing process of getting the data in, trying to do some kind of assessment of the quality, doing the screening, and then portraying the information to the operators in a clear and concise manner.
Okay, nice. You said the 18th, you're talking the 18th Space Control Squadron out of Vandenberg, right?
Correct.
Okay, so you guys are collaborating with the military then on this as well?
Right, so the 18th Space Control Squadron is the one that is responsible for doing the SSA, so the tracking of all the objects that are up there. They also have responsibility for doing screenings and generating what are referred to as CDMs, or conjunction data messages. And we use that to kind of get a second check for what might be going on up there and make sure that we're not missing anything when we report information to our operators.
Okay. And then you said something else too that was curious. You said around the world. So this is actually a global sort of initiative. It's not just, focused on the US or US operators or something like that?
That's correct. We have obviously US operators. We have operators throughout Europe. We have them in South America, like Brazil in particular. We have Arab and Israeli. We have, any number of operators, including, I don't know if you'd refer to them as a consortium, but EUMETSAT, which is, an organization that represents a number of European countries in that. So we probably have at least as many individual countries participating in the SDC as we have individual operators.
Okay, nice. So, so how about pioneering achievements? And it sounds like they're doing a lot of good work there. It sounds like this was sort of initiating a lot of different types of efforts when it comes to spaceflight safety. Dan, maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the achievements that have taken place as a result of the operations in the Space Data Center and the spaceflight safety services they're doing.
Yeah, so again, casting your mind back to the 2000s, before SDA existed, there was really very few space flight safety services. TS talked about some of the military services, and Celestrak has been a very important space data portal with Socrates services on that. But there really wasn't an established non-US government spaceflight safety, space traffic coordination system in existence then. And we're very happy and proud, I think, to be part of a genesis of such a system whereby we looked from the get-go to aggregate data from the government and from commercial operators and from any other SSA provider, to have a system where we could bring all that data together, the most authoritative data, and do analysis with that. And that's groundbreaking in and of itself. And that's why we've gotten the 30 or so operators participating that we do today. But I think also you have to look at the legal and computational constructs that are a part of the Space Data Center. There is legal protections and liability for data misuse. And this is important, I think, to a lot of commercial operators to know that their data is not going to be used against them, basically, that it's dedicated to spaceflight safety purpose. A lot of these operators are highly competitive with each other as commercial companies. And so, you have to have a way to protect that data. So it's legally protected, but then also computationally secure, written right into the contract that AGI, supports to the SDA for the Space Data Center. We have NIST level computational security requirements that took a long time for us to implement, but they've, I think, benefit us very, very well over these last 10 years of services. You can also, Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, please go ahead, TS.
Yeah, so we, in terms of first, so we talked about a little bit about Socrates and actually establishing the first, on the web type of screening of this data, but it actually helped to bridge the gap from the TLEs, which have issues with and weren't designed to do conjunction assessment. They were only designed to maintain track custody for objects in orbit. We went from doing that to having operators realize that, and the government realize that the hardest things to track are the operational satellites because they maneuver to maintain their orbits. And so the TLEs wouldn't necessarily keep up with that because there would be some lag in detecting and processing the maneuvers. And so we actually had Intelsat approach us when we were running Socrates and say, hey, what if we used our ephemeris instead of the TLEs to do this? And that was kind of the genesis for where we are right now with the SDC, because up to that point, the only data being used in any of the screening was the data being provided by the US government through their non-cooperative tracking. So we started, so we were the first ones to get operator ephemeris that was already being produced for other flight dynamics purposes into the system. We started getting other operators, Inmarsat, SES, Telesat, Eutelsat, to buy into this. And then, of course, we were at that time only focused on GEO, but after the Iridium Cosmos collision and some of the issues that at the time JSPOC had with trying to meet the need for doing all this conjunction assessment, basically breaking through that limitation that, oh yeah, we need to do this for the entire world. They couldn't handle the magnitude of the problem for LEO, and we started up what we called Socrates LEO at the time to bring in Iridium and GeoEye and some of those operators into that same kind of framework. So this whole notion of we're gonna use operator ephemeris instead of the government provided data was one of the first that we had for those prototype systems that eventually became what's now the SDC.
So thanks for that, TS. Dan, is there anything you wanted to add on top of that as well?
Yeah, there are some other very important pioneering things I think the SDC has done. One of them is really focused on the sharing of data. There's a lot of talk today, and rightly so, about the open architecture data repository that's mandated in Space Policy Directive 3 for our US. And it is focused on sharing of data. Data lake concept is talked about a lot. In a data lake, you basically take the data in its raw format and ingest it into your space traffic coordination and management system and work with it. And this is actually something that we implemented in the Space Data Center over 10 years ago, and that's been the operating construct for this whole decade. We take the data in whatever format the operator has it in, and we work with them to understand the data. TS does a lot of this work to understand the reference frames, timing systems, element set definitions, and coordinate frames, to convert that all internal to the SDC into a normalized product that we can then do assessment on. But the data lake construct is extremely important. Why? It's because the operators typically, when they buy a spacecraft, they get an orbit determination system that goes with it. And this system oftentimes is more of a black box, and the data it provides and even the formats it's in are what the operator has to work with. So we made the decision early on to have us be the entity that takes their raw format and normalizes it so that we can do computations. I also want to just underscore what TS mentioned about the comparative SSA process. This is something that speaks to quality control, but it's more than that. It's being able to take SSA from a bunch of different entities and do a direct comparison of them all and figure out, are they in family? If they're in family, great. if they're not in family, that means that one or more of them is suspect and maybe latent or inaccurate. So this fundamental concept that TS came up with to do this comparative SSA not only allows us to tell our operators, our customers, hey, here's what the data says, but we have a discrepancy, or hey, it's all in agreement. But it also allows us to reach out to other SSA centers, including the 18th, but also others, to say, hey, we analyzed your product versus the operator data, and maybe they did a maneuver that you need to look at and maybe refine the orbit or catch up on. That's a very important pioneering achievement, I'd say, and we've been proud to support that over the decade and look for continuing to increase that collaboration. We also, in the SDC, are, I would say, one of the leading contributors for data forwarded on to the 18th by the operators that have authorized that. So by having this normalized data, again, in a data lake construct, but then we normalize it, that allows us to then map that data into the formats that other SSA centers are looking for and give them the ephemeris, the maneuvers that are planned, and other elements of information that are important to them.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I'm sure it's a big job. It sounds interesting, a lot going on. Let's look at this maybe a little bit from a broader context. Obviously, space is important. A lot happens, a lot of reliance on space, especially here in the U.S., a lot of concern about the long-term sustainability of space and the economy and everything that goes with it. Dan, could you maybe speak to spaceflight safety as a means to an end to support long-term sustainability of space?
Yeah, I think if you look at long-term sustainability, there are some key components to that, and you can divide them up by remediation and avoiding collision and post-mission disposal. Those are kind of the three central areas. We're supporting at least the collision avoidance part, but I think as we get to remediation, which is removing debris and other satellites that are ready to come down from orbit, I think that the SDA and SDC are very relevant to that as well. In my view, a lot of those three elements, the post-mission disposal, avoiding collisions, and remediation, all hinge on data exchange. Being able to aggregate data, let's call it crowdsource as a common term, but also have, again, the comparative SSA process in place and quality control so that you can pull in data from many entities and try and come up with a good answer, or as clear a picture as possible. A lot of times in the military, at least, they used to say, talk about trust but verify. What I've seen in the 10 years, or actually a lot more years than that, but in the commercial side, I've seen instead of working to trust but verify, it seems like there's a thought that they haven't verified it, therefore they won't trust it. And we don't get over that hump of working to verify data so that it can be aggregated like we feel it needs to be for long-term sustainability.
Okay, great. So that sounds like a lot of great work. Like I said, a lot of great focus here on what's going on. We're certainly glad that SDA is out there, Space Data Association, showing the initiative to come together and do these things for spaceflight safety, responsible behaviors, trying to help establish things like best practices for these types of things. TS, can you maybe tell us briefly a little bit about the membership of SDA and the status of it today?
Sure, I can take a look. I've got our website that gives us a status for everything that we have going on the site. Right now, we're showing that we have a total of 30 operators, and we've got data for 685 satellites from those operators. So that breaks down to 271 in GEO and another 414 for those LEO and MEO satellites that we have up there.
Okay. And then maybe lastly, that's sort of current status. What's coming down the pike, Dan? Can you speak maybe a little bit to, everybody hears about large constellations and everything today, and what is that going to mean? How is that going to impact the situation? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, and also I want to circle back to TS's stats there. A lot of people think that the Space Data Center is designed for GEO, and we actually have more LEO satellites than GEO today. It is truly all orbit regimes, and I just want to foot stomp that a little bit. But then answering your question, I think we're now entering the new space era of large constellations. There's a lot of satellite applications that have been filed, both within the FCC and the ITU. Our latest count of these, this is an update to a paper from January of this year that Sal Alfano and I wrote, is that we have 107,000 applications for spacecraft. Now, it's clear that a good portion of those will never be realized. And we can look at, for example, the OneWeb constellation that was going, and then they launched some satellites and then it stopped. My understanding is that they're potentially back in the ball game, but my message is still that probably, let's say, 60% or 70% of the spacecraft that are filed for will not be realized.
Sure.
But even if you take that on 100,000, that still means that we're going to have some 15 times more active spacecraft than we do today.
Yep.
And that's one element of interest, not just interest, but it's going to result in a lot more potential collisions and close approaches than our operators face today. Yet today, I feel that based on our experiences with the SDC operators, they are overwhelmed today sorting through all these potential collisions. And now we may have 10 to 15 times more active spacecraft up there to deal with. And that changes the whole dynamic of the risk profile. On top of that, we have new things like Space Fence and commercial SSA providers with radar and optical systems and advanced analytics and innovation that we feel is on track to increase the tracked population. This is stuff that's already up there,
yep,
but we just haven't known about it before. Could increase it maybe in the next 5 years by a factor of 10 as well. So we're really heading into this time where, yes, we've exchanged data before and tried to coordinate where we can, but it is going to be absolutely essential that we share data and we have much more accurate data than we have in the past. We just cannot continue with data that's not suitable to the task.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, from the U.S. government standpoint, that's what they're trying to get their hands around with Space Policy Directive 3, SPD, on space traffic management.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, great. All right, well, hey, that's all great information, guys. Before we sing happy birthday to SDA SDC, is there anything either one of you want to add?
I'll just say it's been a pleasure working with all these operators. They really have their heart in the right place. They're very concerned about spaceflight safety. I think that the commercial effort and initiative here, the goal on the part of these operators, is to try and augment, to gap fill for spaceflight safety as they are able to aspire to do as good a job as they can. I think they're looking, though, for a global approach in the future where we can aggregate data better amongst everybody.
Okay. TS?
I would have to second that. I mean, the fact that the SDC exists, without any government mandate that it exists, is a testament to the people that are working in each one of those organizations and the flight dynamics shops, that they realize that this is an important issue, not only for their commercial viability, but for protecting the entire space environment. So I think it's a great role model, the fact that we can work together without some kind of regulation or legal requirement to do this, and to work together across all sorts of different cultures and countries is really, I think, a positive role model for us going forward.
Nice. Well, great. Well, hey, you guys, really appreciate you both being here today to talk about the topic. It's an important one, obviously, one that everybody needs to be concerned about. We really appreciate your input today. And with that, are you guys ready to sing?
Can we at least say
Can we
happy
say
birthday?
happy
birthday, yes. Can we say happy
I don't know
birthday,
if we want to.
SDA, SDC? Happy birthday, SDA, SDC.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
And now we start to sing. And you can just cut it right there.